meteors of differing size, and many human bodies. Among these were some clad in the insulated spacesuits with their transparent glassite helmets. Kent wondered what wreck they had abandoned hastily in those suits, only to be swept with it into the dead area to die in their suits. By the end of that ship day, the Pallas, having floated almost completely around the wreck pack, finally struck the wrecks at its edge with a jarring shock, then bobbled for a while and lay still. From pilot house and deck windows the men looked eagerly forth. Their ship floated at the wreck pack's edge. Directly to its right floated a sleek, shining Uranus-Jupiter passenger ship whose bows had been smashed in by a meteor. On their left bobbed an unmarked freighter of the old type with projecting rocket tubes, apparently intact. Beyond them in the wreck pack lay another Uranus craft, a freighter, and beyond it stretched the countless other wrecks. Captain Crane summoned the crew together again on the middle deck. "Men, we've reached the wreck pack at the dead area's center, and here we'll stay until the end of time, unless we get out under our own power. Mr. Kent has suggested a possible way of doing so, which I consider highly feasible. He has suggested that in some of the ships in the wreck pack may be found enough fuel to enable us to escape from the dead area once it is transferred to this ship. I am going to permit him to explore the wreck pack with a party in spacesuits, and I'm asking for volunteers for this service." The entire crew stepped quickly forward. Crane smiled. 12 of you will be enough, he told them. The 8 tube men and 4 of the cargo men will go, therefore, with Mr. Kent and Mr. Liggett as leaders. Mr. Kent, you may address the men if you wish. "Get down to the lower airlock and into your spacesuits at once, then," Kent told them. "Mr. Liggett, will you supervise that?" As Liggett and the men trooped down to the airlock, Kent turned back towards his superior. "There's a very real chance of your becoming lost in this huge wreck pack, Kent," Crane told him. "So be very careful to keep your bearings at all times. I know I can depend on you." "I'll do my best," Kent was saying, when Liggett's excited face reappeared suddenly at the stair. "There are men coming toward the Pallas, along the wreck pack's edge," he reported. "A half a dozen men in spacesuits." "You must be mistaken, Liggett," exclaimed Crane. "They must be some of the bodies in spacesuits we saw in the pack." "No, they're living men!" Liggett cried. "They're coming straight toward us. Come down and see." Crane and Kent followed Liggett quickly down to the airlock room, where the men who had started donning their spacesuits were now peering excitedly from the windows. Crane and Kent looked where Liggett pointed, along the wreck pack's edge to the ship's right. 6 floating shapes, men in spacesuits, were approaching along the pack's border. They floated smoothly through space, reaching the wrecked passenger ship beside the Pallas. They braced their feet against its side and propelled themselves on through the void like swimmers under water toward the Pallas. "They must be survivors from some wreck that drifted in here as we did," Kent exclaimed. "Maybe they've lived here for months." "It's evident that they saw the Pallas drift into the pack and have come to investigate," Crane estimated. "Open the airlock for them, men. They'll want to come inside." 2 of the men spun the wheels that slid aside the airlock's outer door. In a moment the half dozen men outside had reached the ship's side and had pulled themselves down inside the airlock. When all were in, the outer door was closed and air hissed in to fill the lock. The airlock's inner door then slid open, and the newcomers stepped into the ship's interior, unscrewing their transparent helmets as they did so. For a few moments the visitors silently surveyed their new surroundings. Their leader was a swarthy individual with sardonic black eyes, who, on noticing Crane's captain insignia, came toward him with outstretched hand. His followers seemed to be cargo men or deck men, looking hardly intelligent enough to Kent's eyes to be tube men. "Welcome to our city," their leader exclaimed as he shook Crane's hand. "We saw your ship drift in, but hardly expected to find anyone living in it." "I'll confess that we're surprised ourselves to find any life here," Crane told him. "You're living on one of the wrecks?" The other nodded. "Yes, on the Martian Queen, a quarter-mile along the pack's edge. It was a Saturn-Neptune passenger ship, and about a month ago we were at this cursed dead area's edge when half of our rocket tubes exploded. 18 of us escaped the explosion, the ship's walls still being tight, and we drifted into the pack here and have been living here ever since. My name's Krell," he added, "and I was a tube man on the ship. I and another of the tube men named Jandron were the highest in rank left. all the officers and other tube men having been killed, so we took charge and have been keeping order." "What about your passengers?" Liggett asked. "All killed but one," Krell answered. "When the tubes let go, they smashed up the whole lower 2 decks." Crane briefly explained to him the Pallas's predicament. "Mr. Kent and Mr. Liggett were on the point of starting a search of the wreck pack for fuel when you arrived," he said. "With enough fuel we can get clear of the dead area." Krell's eyes lit up. "That would mean a getaway for all of us. It surely ought to be possible." "Do you know whether there are any ships in the pack with fuel in their tanks?" Kent asked. Krell shook his head. "We've searched through the wreck pack a good bit, but never bothered about fuel, it being no good to us. But there ought to be some, at least. There's enough wrecks in this cursed place to make it possible to find almost anything." "You'd better not start exploring, though," he added, "without some of us along as guides, for I'm here to tell you that you can lose yourself in this wreck pack without knowing it. If you wait until tomorrow, I'll come over myself and go with you." "I think that would be wise," Crane said to Kent. "There's plenty of time." "Time is the one thing there's plenty of in this damned place," Krell agreed. "We'll be getting back to the Martian Queen now, and give the good news to Jandron and the rest." "Wouldn't mind if Liggett and I came along, would you?" Kent asked. "I'd like to see how your ship's fixed, that is, if it's all right with you, sir," he added to his superior. Crane nodded. "It's all right if you don't stay long," he said. But to Kent's surprise, Krell seemed reluctant to endorse his proposal. "I guess it'll be all right," he said slowly. There's nothing much on the Martian Queen to see." Krell and his followers replaced their helmets and returned into the airlock. Liggett followed them, and as Kent struggled hastily into a spacesuit, he found Captain Crane at his side. "Kent, look sharp when you get over on that ship," Crane told him. "I don't like the look of this Krell, and his story about all the officers being killed in the explosion sounds fishy to me." "To me, too," Kent agreed. "But Liggett and I will have the suit phones in our spacesuits and can call you from there in case of need." Crane nodded, and Kent, with the spacesuit on and transparent helmet screwed tight, stepped into the airlock with the rest. The airlock's inner door closed, the outer one opened, and as the air puffed out into space, Kent and Krell and Liggett leapt out into the void, the others following. It was no novelty to Kent to float in a spacesuit in the empty void. He and the others now floated as smoothly as though under water toward a wrecked liner at the Pallas's right. They reached it, pulled themselves around it, and with feet braced against its side, propelled themselves on through space along the border of the wreck pack. They passed a half-dozen wrecks thus, before coming to the Martian Queen. It was a silvery, glistening ship whose stern and lower walls were bulging and strained, but not cracked. Kent told himself that Krell had spoken truth about the exploding rocket tubes, at least. They struck the Martian Queen's side and entered the upper airlock open for them. Once through the airlock, they found themselves on the ship's upper deck, and when Kent and Liggett removed their helmets with the others, they found a full dozen men confronting them, a brutal-faced group who exhibited some surprise at the sight of them. Foremost among them stood a tall, heavy individual who regarded Kent and Liggett with the cold, suspicious eyes of an animal. "My comrade and fellow ruler here, Wald Jandron," said Krell. To Jandron he explained rapidly, "The whole crew of the Pallas is alive, and they say if they can find fuel in the wreck pack, their ship can get out of here." "Good," grunted Jandron. "The sooner they can do it, the better it will be for us." Kent saw Liggett flush angrily, but he ignored Jandron and spoke to Krell. "You said one of your passengers had escaped the explosion." To Kent's amazement, a girl stepped from behind the group of men, a slim girl with pale face and steady dark eyes. "I'm the passenger," she told him. "My name is Marta Mallen." Kent and Liggett stared, astounded. "Good Lord!" Kent exclaimed. A girl like you on this ship?" "Miss Mallen happened to be on the upper deck at the time of the explosion, and so escaped when the other passengers were killed," Krell explained smoothly. "Isn't that so, Miss Mallen?" The girl's eyes had not left Kent's, but at Krell's words she nodded. "Yes, that is so," she said mechanically. Kent collected his whirling thoughts. "But wouldn't you rather go back to the Pallas with us?" he asked. "I'm sure you'd be more comfortable there." "She doesn't go," grunted Jandron. Kent turned in quick wrath toward him, but Krell intervened. "Jandron only means that Miss Mallen is much more comfortable on this passenger ship than she'd be in your freighter." He shot a glance at the girl as he spoke, and Kent saw her wince. "I'm afraid